My home city of Philadelphia is very much an iconic city. Being the literal birthplace of the United States of America, hosting both the Continental Congresses of 1774 and 1776 and the Constitutional Convention of 1787, it's safe to say that Philadelphia has acquired its status as a truly historical city. And what would a historical city be without icons that cement it as apart from the rest? Some of them take the form of iconic structures and artifacts. The Liberty Bell, Independence Hall, the Philadelphia Museum of Art, the Rocky Statue, Philadelphia City Hall, Reading Terminal, Penn's Landing, and I'll even add 30th Street Station to the mix too. For others, it could be a local cultural staple dish, cheesesteaks, hoagies, pretzels, or water ice, or cultural events like the Mummers Parade. Others can say the same for historical figures who have called it home, from William Penn, Benjamin Franklin, and Walt Whitman, to Grace Kelly, Billie Holiday, Kevin Hart, and Will Smith, among many, many, many more. For others, it can be our sports franchises, and by extension, the crazy awesome fans that follow them. Go Birds to you all. This is all very much true in the realm of transportation around Philadelphia as well. Some can make a reasonable argument that Philly's trolleys, trolley buses, and buses, all painted in SEPTA's traditional white with red and blue stripes, have all become icons of the city in the modern day. Whether that be for good or for ill is in the eyes of the beholder, of course. Historical vehicles too, like the Red Arrow trolleys, the green and cream buses and trolleys of the PTC, and the Brill Bullet cars of the Norristown High Speed Line, among many others, could fit the bill as symbols of Philadelphia's transport scene as well. But for me, and probably a lot of you, very few can match the legend for reliability and dependability that have come to surround it, that is the stoic workhorse of SEPTA's regional rail system, the Silverliner IV EMUs. For 50 years, these electric trains have been the old reliables of SEPTA's regional rail operations, perhaps far more so than their builders or buyers expected of them when they were first made. While one may see them as a simple vehicle used to get from A to B with little fanfare to speak of and very little pizzazz in the way it does things, there is no doubt that the fact that they've stuck around for as long as they have made them not only familiar, but ubiquitous when it comes to getting around the Delaware Valley and Philly's metro area. So much so that one thing that SEPTA has alluded to on and off at times, but is very rarely talked about, is the question of what comes next when these trains see the end of their service lives. It's a very important question. How do you follow up on a reliable icon like these, beloved by crews and riders alike? Can you exceed the expectations they've set? And more simply, what could be the replacement for the Silverliner IV? What could the Silverliner VI look like? Naturally, for one to understand what could be, we have to understand what we have now. And of course, one can't fully understand what we have without understanding how that came to be. Translation, if you're not pretentious, we have to discuss the history of the Silverliner IVs. It's the late 1960s, and the newly formed SEPTA is in the middle of a whirlwind of action to improve the commuter rail services in the greater Philadelphia region. Before this, though, in 1963, the same year that SEPTA came into existence, one of SEPTA's predecessor agencies, the Passenger Service Improvement Corporation, or PSIC, was created by the city of Philadelphia to subsidize and improve commuter services on the rail lines run by the Pennsylvania and Reading Railroads. To do this, they would put in an order with the famous Budd Car Company based in North Philadelphia for a series of brand new multiple unit electric rail cars to replace the earliest models of the Pennsylvania Railroad and Reading's MU cars. Most famously, the earliest of the Pennsylvania's MP54s, which were first built beginning in 1908. The car that Budd presented, which was based on the development of the earlier Pioneer 3 cars, would be purchased by the PSIC, which would in turn lease the cars out to the financially struggling Pennsylvania and Reading railroads. Yeah, that was just how bad things were for these companies by this stage. And this trend would also continue after the PSIC was officially folded into SEPTA in 1966. Owing to their striking stainless steel body, especially compared to what it was running alongside with at the time, the cars earned the nickname Silverliners, starting a naming convention that continues today with every subsequent name of MU car that SEPTA has owned. This car, though, was not in fact the Silverliner IV that we've known and loved for so long. This was in fact the Silverliner II, which, while the first car to be given the name, was named the Silverliner II, as the original Pioneer 3 cars were retroactively named as Silverliner Is. Everybody got that? In 1967, though, SEPTA, which by this point had absorbed the PSIC, placed an order for an additional 20 cars to augment the 59 Silverliner IIs and the 6 Silverliner Is, along with all of the ex-Pennsy and Reading units still in service, with these cars being made specifically for service on the Pennsy side of the network, those being what is now the Trenton line, the Paoli-Thorndale line, the Wilmington-Newark line, the Media-Wawa line, the Kinwood line, and the Chestnut Hill West line. And for those of you possibly confused, the airport line didn't exist yet. It wouldn't exist until the late 80s. These cars, the Silverliner IIIs, were very similar in many ways to the Silverliner IIs mechanically, with the main difference being the manufacturer, being built by the St. Louis Car Company, guess where they're from, rather than the locally built Budd Company like the IIs. Overall, both of these cars were very good and saw service until 2012. However, these orders would not be a total replacement for the original cars, rather just a replacement for the oldest examples of the ex-Pennsy and Reading stock. As such, in the early 1970s, SEPTA sought a series of multiple units to see off the older cars once and for all. Going back to Budd for the car bodies and General Electric for the traction equipment, the Silverliner IV, from its inception, was made to run on both the Reading and Pennsy, by then Penn Central, lines, as both the Penn Central and Reading had agreed to join forces in the imminent creation of the government-backed Conrail, and that's alongside the fact that it wouldn't be too long before the plan to connect both sides of SEPTA's system with a tunnel through Center City would officially break ground. All told, 232 Silverliner IV cars were built and delivered to SEPTA for use on the Penn Central and Reading lines between 1973 and 1976, consisting of 47 single-car units and 184 cars that operate as two-car units, often called married pairs, with the very last units arriving just as both the Penn Central and Reading were folded into Conrail in April of 1976. This massive order, easily the largest in SEPTA's time-running regional rail to this day, saw off the vast majority of the older Pennsy and Reading MU cars, with the exception of some of the newer models of the Reading Blue Liners that had been through a refit to keep them running, with those cars sticking around until 1990. Oh hey, I actually got to see a few of those lately. Man, do they look good for their age. On top of that, the Silverliner IV's body and underpinnings would spur another successful series of multiple unit cars in the form of the Aero 2 and Aero 3 cars made for New Jersey Transit, which, like the Silverliner IVs, still see service today both on major Northeast Corridor services all the way down to the humble but really cool little shuttle service to Princeton, better known as the Princeton Dinky, and everything in between on NJT's electrified lines. Though in terms of interior appearance, they definitely share a lot of their original 1970s furnishings than the Silverliner IVs do. And for those fellow nerds out there who want more of a look in depth on the technicals of the Silverliner IV, definitely check out Thunderbolt 1000 Siren Productions video on the Silverliner IVs and his Engines of SEPTA series. It really is a testament to how solid the design and build of the Silverliner IVs are that in all this time, the IVs have never officially seen an official rebuild program. Although the change to their interior over the years would definitely lead you to think otherwise, as well as several mechanical changes and upgrades they've had over the years. All told, mechanically speaking, the IVs have been built like a metaphorical tank. Simple, effective, and it gets the job done. And the fact that it's taken this long for ideas regarding a replacement to be seriously considered, it stands to reason that their replacement has quite a legacy to fill in that sense. But before we do, there is kind of an obvious elephant in the room. I said that the next generation of Silverliner to arrive on the scene would be the Silverliner 6, and those who are unfamiliar with SEPTA may ask, what about the Silverliner 5? Well, let's talk about them for a little bit. Built by Hyundai Rotem between 2009 and 2016, the Silverliner 5s were the long-awaited replacement for the nearly life-expired Silverliner 2s and 3s. The awkward thing about them right from the go, though, was that when they arrived for service in 2010, they were already 5 years late, with their introduction originally slated to begin in 2005. But due to numerous factors, including contract disputes between Hyundai Rotem and Bombardier, thus delaying the design phase, let alone the build, and most notably the need for Hyundai Rotem to build the final assembly plant for the trains in South Philly, which is sadly gone now by the way, the introduction to service faced that 5-year delay, forcing the Silverliner IIs and IIIs to keep running, even though they were falling apart at the seams in a lot of cases, including an instance of a Silverliner II catching fire, and only being officially retired when the Federal Railroad Administration had to outright bar them from operation. Once the 5s did arrive though, they were certainly solid cars for the regional rail lines, bringing aboard a lot of classic features and aesthetics of the 4s with more modern amenities, such as actual passenger information systems, though mostly just used for saying the next station and then playing nothing but advertisements otherwise, accompanied by an automated message system that occasionally pronounces the name of stations wrong.
This stop is Swarthmore. Watch your
It's Swarthmore. However, these minor annoyances are made up for by really good acceleration, easily dusting a 4 off the line, a higher top speed, and the greatest feature anyone has ever put on any train ever. A window out the front of the train for the passengers, known to those who love this sort of thing as the foamer window. Yes, I do make a point of sitting as close as I can to the front any chance I get, which is almost always 2 rows from the front, which is apparently for safety reasons, but also given the fact that the cab of a Silverliner 5 suffers from mailbox syndrome, being off to the right side like on a subway car and is therefore rather cramped, it doesn't shock me that crew members use the corded off front 2 rows to stow their bags, which often happens. I don't blame them either. I mean, at least with the 4s, you have the whole front vestibule as the cab, so you have a lot more space to stretch your legs on the station stops. However, there is one important notable event to consider with the 5s, which was when all of them were removed from service. In July 2016, all 120 Silverliner 5 cars were removed from service due to fatigue cracks found in the bogies of the cars, those being the wheel assemblies if you're not familiar with railroad terminology. Needless to say, SEPTA was in kind of a bad position, with 1/3 of their entire fleet out of service for a period of a few months, while SEPTA and Hyundai Rotem fixed the issue, which was found to be the fault of poor quality steel from a third party and was resolved by November of that year after around 5 months. Around the same time though, and on a much more positive note, the Silverliner 5s had begun work elsewhere. If you're watching this video from the snow-covered urban sprawl with pretty mountains in the background that is Denver, Colorado, the Silverliner 5s may look familiar to you. And that's because these are the same cars used by Denver's Regional Transportation District, or RTD, for their electrified commuter rail services radiating out of Union Station. Denver ordered 33 2-car sets of these trains, and they mostly run as either just a single 2-car train or a 4-car train during rush hours, whereas SEPTA trains run theirs as either 3, 4, 5, or 6-car trains, with the notable exception of the Kinwood line, but that's a whole other thing. As far as I know, RTD's Silverliner 5s have not had the issues SEPTA faced, and they run rather well, except for the notable exclusion of a foamer window on these versions. My sincere condolences for Denver Transit riders for not being blessed with that joy. As if the Rockies and Broncos let you down enough already. At least you got the Nuggets and the Avalanche. In the years since then, the Silverliner 5s have integrated themselves fine into the fabric of the regional rail network, and due to their younger age, they've begun to become the unit of choice on as many services as they can run due to the age of the 4s, as even though the 4s are famed for their reliability, Father Time will remain undefeated at the end of the day. So to gain a better understanding of what the replacement has to do to live up to its legacy, I had to sit down with a friend of a friend who happens to be a conductor at SEPTA, to see what he thinks of the 4s and what he expects of future rolling stock. And funnily enough, he's also named Steve.
And before we start the interview, I just wanted to introduce you to someone who you will likely see. This is my cat. He is a rambunctious little 1.5-year-old tuxedo cat we've been taking care of for a few months now. And the reason why you'll likely see him in our interview is because if he was locked out of the room, he would howl at us. And For those of you who want to know his name is Halsey. And no, I did not name him after the singer. If you can guess who I named him after, you get a cookie. Anyway, say hi, Halsey. Yeah. So anyway, on to the show. But yeah, again, thanks for coming out. So let's start with the introductions.
All right, so my name's Steven. I've been employed for about 2 years at SEPTA right now.
Oh, nice.
Currently in the program for engineering.
Oh, awesome. And so you're a conductor now, but you're going to be engineer, is that right? Or is it?
Technically still assistant conductor.
Assistant conductor.
It's kind of like a branching training program in a way.
Right.
They group everyone together for the first few phases where it's like a shared training in a way that's a requirement for both professions.
Right.
And then you get to the point and you split off and then it's either or.
Yeah, I gotcha. So, seems like they definitely want to be, Cat's really playful today, but I guess they really want you to be sort of adaptable to different situations, I would guess you could say.
Well, depending on who you ask, they both have their pros and cons. They're technically two separate professions.
Right.
And in SEPTA's case, two different unions.
Yeah, I can see that. So you're working with two different unions. That's definitely a whole big can of worms there, I guess you could say. But more to the point that I wanted to go through is the equipment your colleagues work on day to day. So I definitely know there's a lot of affection for the Silverliner IV trains. Mm-hmm. They've obviously been around for 50 years at this point, and sure, a lot of it may be nostalgia in some ways, but do you think the affection that they have is warranted?
I would say, again, it depends on who you ask. You have, right now, an eclectic mix of old heads at SEPTA that just prefer older, simpler mechanics.
Right.
And then the newer people that kind of just look at things and then tilt their head like, this thing's older than my dad.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's probably true in a lot of cases. Yeah, first came around in '73 for Pete's sake, and kind of sounds in some ways because it kind of sounds in some ways like what's going on with Metra in Chicago, because Metra really loves their EMD diesels. Like
again, you get to the point where you have so much in your fleet, you don't want to keep anything else.
Yeah.
They really have quite an affection for anything with the 645 prime mover in it.
Oh, yeah.
Which is basically anything that's an F40.
True. And plus those engines sound awesome.
They do.
Yeah. Yeah, and the same is true with the fours, because like they're familiar. I guess they're simpler to work on maybe than the Silverliner 5s maybe, at least for the older
for the most part, because with the 5s you introduce a whole other layer of computers. With trying to troubleshoot on the equipment in the field, you're kind of more at freedom to, I can finagle this and that.
Yeah, you just kind of ad-lib it in a lot of ways.
With the 5s, it's all just a computer. It's either you turn it off and turn it back on, and if it doesn't work, well, then it's broken.
Yeah, exactly. And I know that's the case with a lot of newer stuff, is that computer glitches can be like major headaches with modern trains. Yeah, and so it's easy to see, like, if it's simple, why not keep it as long as you can? But in terms of like the day-to-day use by the crews, do you think that a lot of people prefer the 4s over the 5s, or do you think that they have their strengths and weaknesses, at least as far as the crews are concerned?
It goes both ways. Again, we have quite a fair amount of old heads. They prefer, having their two throttles set up, with brake, power, and everything.
Yeah, the old-fashioned way.
With the straight air controls. And then with the newer 5s, it's all, desktop controls.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
It's basically like how you'd be playing a video game almost. Well, not quite the same, but...
Yeah, true. And of course, I've had some peeks into the cabs of like the 4s and the 5s before. Mm-hmm. The 5 definitely looks more like more flight simulator-esque by comparison compared to the 4s.
Right, or like the train simulator consoles that they came
exactly.
back in the early 2000s.
I need to get one of those.
I mean, I already have one for racing games, but
Right.
yeah. But yeah, but of course, as we mentioned, the fours are going to be going on 50 years old. I think the oldest ones would be turning 50 this year, and then
Next year.
Next year,
74.
Yeah, 74, and then the oldest ones came around in 76. But I'd imagine, even as much as the older heads among the staff love them, and like the fact that there's slowly but surely been a talk of a replacement. Do you think age has become more and more of a concern with their mechanics for maybe like and do you think that it's more like the crews maybe more concerned than the higher ups or vice versa?
The cost with keeping them around kind of becomes a factor, but the thing with them is they're more or less structurally sound. It's more so, when is this component going to need to be replaced? How often does it need to be replaced? The nitty-gritty details.
Yeah,
because structurally, you're not going to get better quality.
Yeah, exactly. That's kind of the view I got with the Force generally. Is the whole meme of Bud don't break.
Yeah.
You know, the Bud car bodies are just built to last forever.
And actually with the fours in particular, the car bodies were made by Avco. I'm not quite sure how to pronounce that, but it's also the same company that Bud had. Some of the bodies done for like the M1s and M3s up in New York.
Yeah, for the LIRR and Metro North. Yeah, and those things, like they still have the M3s going around on both those, I believe.
Yep. Same as well too. Of course, they're a little bit newer, being 81, 83.
Something to that effect, yeah. I think they just recently retired the M1s, at least a few years back.
Yeah, I want to say that was maybe about 5 or 6 years ago, maybe a little longer.
Yeah, but basically, like from the crew's perspective, I'm guessing like they're perfectly fine with the fours sticking around for a good while, but as long as they possibly can. But I'm guessing perhaps maybe the higher ups are more concerned than the people working on them day to day are.
To be honest with you, I feel like it'll probably end up being a case where they're going to run it into the ground more or less, or until the FRA says no.
Right.
This was also a case with the Silverliner 2s and 3s because they were built with lighter weight construction.
Yeah.
And it was only until the FRA said, you got to have this amount of spec rating for your collision posts.
Yeah.
Where the doors and the front corners were.
Right, exactly.
And it was until they said no that's when they were finally pulled.
Yeah, and I don't think it helped either that the Silverliner 5s were like 5 years late. Like they were supposed to come around in 05, but
yeah, there was a lot of back and forth between that because when the original contract was put out, it was supposed to go to Bombardier.
Oh, really?
And then through lowest bidding rules and stuff like that, there was a lot of back and forth and lawsuits.
Yeah.
Until eventually it was settled and reissued for Hyundai Rotem around 2008.
Yeah, I was gonna say, and I honestly didn't know that before. I thought that like everything I always said was that was really nothing about like they said there were contract disputes, but there was nothing much specific about what it was. But yeah, Bombardier being involved would have been interesting because I know like over in Europe, Bombardier made a whole lot of different trains for this sort of operation, especially in Britain. And eventually, of course, they were bought up by everyone's favorite rolling stock manufacturer these days, Alstom. Yeah.
That was a whole mess in its own right with the European antitrust laws and fair competition and everything, and that was a whole...
Yeah, and but one thing that, especially since I saw this one scenario with the Silverliner 4s for myself once, so I was out filming at Media Station, and just during the rush hours, a good number of trains going by, a lot of good stuff. But I saw that there was one train of 4s that was running late, quite a bit late. It was progressively getting more and more late as you went through. And then when it got to Moylan Rose Valley, stopped just before Media, for those who don't know, it just seemed like it dead stopped on my tracker, and I'm just like, what is going on now? And then a guy in the parking lot who was picking up a passenger, he was saying that the train broke down, and like he said that was like a down wire, but it apparently wasn't, because the train did come in like 5 minutes after he said that. I don't think that's a down wire situation, at least with the catenary. But it was so late, in fact, that it was actually holding up a rush hour express train behind it. And is that a situation? And I honestly don't know what sort of mechanical issue it may have been, or any sort of issue it was. But is that becoming more and more of a thing with the age of the cars?
I wouldn't say it's the cars themselves. I mean, depending on if the train, had left town one time, if the crew was ready.
True.
And depending on what exactly broke down en route.
Yeah.
I would say the biggest problem we have with the cars right now is just having all the traction motors working.
Yeah.
I've been told by quite a few crews it's a good day that when you only have one bad traction motor.
Oh, jeez. Yeah, and
because the things really weren't designed to haul extra weight behind them. They're designed to haul themselves and maybe one extra car.
Yeah.
Break.
Yeah, and now you see like
getting below 50%. That's when you really start having issues.
Yeah, and especially since it's not uncommon, I see like 5 or 6 car formations on trains. That that doesn't sound like it's going to bode well for the cars mechanically long term. Granted, they are MU cars; they're mobile units, so like performance-wise, they do like work together to accelerate the train, to break the train. At least
what I see. But unlike, say, for example, your full 11 car sets, or more modern high-speed MUs, or even actually like the old Reading Blues.
The Blue Liners.
Blue Liners. They had a high voltage bus in between every car.
Ah, yeah.
So if you ever see above the headlight, there'll be like a metal protrusion on the top.
Yeah.
Those cars had full 12.5 across every car.
Wow.
So you could run with, say, 2 out of 4 pantographs and everything. And all your motors and everything would still work.
Yeah. I mean,
with the 4s, even the 2s and 3s and 5s and all that, you only have a high voltage link between your married cars.
Right.
So if you have a pantograph go down, that car is dead.
Oh God, yeah.
Dead.
Yeah, because
and just extra weight at that point.
Yeah, it's been like that just becomes dead weight. Yeah, that's crazy. But yeah, like with the cars being married pair sets, at least a good number of them, they're of course single units. But with the married pair sets, like they're basically left to fend for themselves in a lot of ways, I guess, in mechanically speaking.
Well, part of it is there's shared components between both cars. You got the one pantograph and then your high voltage bus between both of them. So with that instance, you lose one traction motor, you still have 3 more.
Right.
And you're still more or less good to go. A lot of the reasoning behind the longer trains these days is almost down to manpower, believe it or not. If you remember back like 10, 15 years ago, middle of the day, you'd see like 2 or 3 cars out by themselves.
Yeah.
And then the same equipment reshuffled around for rush hour, and then you have your 6 car sets and stuff like that. But they don't do a lot of that midday, cutting and reshuffling like they used to.
Yeah, they don't change.
It's mainly if it's not broke, don't mess with it.
Yeah, and I have seen this like at terminal stations. They obviously don't switch around the cars all that much. They just put the engineer back in the front in the rear cabinet and send them back on their way. Yes, and it's kind of why a lot of people. I've seen this question pop up a lot. Is that a lot of people wonder why, like on maybe a midday train, you have a 5-car train, but only 2 or 3 of them are open to passengers.
That's exactly what it is. They just don't break things down midday like they used to.
Exactly, and you wouldn't see them do that anytime soon.
More than likely, no. It's a lot of it is the manpower involved with yards.
Right.
To do all the shuffling and having yard crews for that. And right now, with how things are, that's something they don't really want to go back to.
Yeah, it's just It's just annoying for them, I would imagine, and really not worth the effort, I would imagine.
But then also, you have these longer 4 or 5 car drafts out. Say something were to go wrong, you still have that much extra available equipment with you.
Right. Yeah.
Which plays into the whole age factor of the cars too.
That I'd imagine as well, because like you said, like that whole saying, you're lucky if you have a set with only one bad motor. You give yourself a lot of options with a 5-car train, as opposed to like just 3
power to keep going.
Yeah, exactly. So that's definitely going to be a big factor with them. And along those lines, what do you think has been, because this whole discussion of replacing the 4s, it's kind of been an on and off topic basically since the Silverliner 5s came around. I think I saw some early forum posts from like 2013 as far back about possible replacements for the 4s. And I know with SEPTA, funding is always a big concern. It's become it's like the most common phrase uttered, I think, when it comes to SEPTA and in the circles I'm in. But do you think that's alone is the biggest hang-up, or do you think there's other things as well, if there's anything you've heard?
I would say it's mostly just the funding, but with a lot of things at SEPTA, it's the notion of if it isn't broke, don't fix it.
Yeah, I can definitely see that.
With a lot of things that happened during COVID with deferred maintenance, deferred promotions, stuff like that, it's really kind of put them behind an 8 ball.
Yeah.
Because for the longest time they were preaching this message of, it's a post-COVID world. People aren't going to come back to the train. We don't have to put ourselves in this situation that we have to be trying to be ahead of things. And 2023 comes around and it's like, oh.
Yeah, it just becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, doesn't it?
Right.
But since there has been, I guess kind of slowly, more of a talk about the 4s in transit circles, do you think that, is there any info that you may have seen that suggests what could be in the pipeline as a possible replacement, or if there isn't really much to say?
The biggest tidbit that I've come across is there were mentions of tacking on the NGT order for the multi-level MLVs.
I did hear about that, yeah.
But the biggest issue with that is it's still in the design phase. And going back to the whole Bombardier-Alstom merger, it's one of the projects that kind of got held up within that process and things changed out.
Yeah, especially with the, especially since, like you said, Bombardier merged with Alstom, and Alstom themselves are having a great time right now with the Acela 2s.
Well, that's a whole different type of beast there with how those things are operating.
Oh yeah, and I've read the Inspector General's report, and oh boy, that was quite a read. That was quite a read.
It was indeed.
Yeah, sort of a more general thing really is that, of course, we were talking about SEPTA's ridership on regional rail. And I've been reading their statistics pages and that sort of thing. Like bus ridership is like just shy of 80% for the last numbers I've seen. Regional rail hovering in the low to mid 50% range, and the same is true with the Market Frankfurt and the Broad Street lines and all that stuff. And speaking personally, like I know like a lot of people, myself included, say that like overall the best way for any agency moving forward is to like double down on frequency, and like obviously. And that's what SEPTA, I know that's what SEPTA wanted to do in the 80s when the tunnel opened, which is like run trains like every 15 minutes maybe, and become less dependent on the 9 to 5 office worker and more for like just every trip possible. From what I understand though, staffing's a big issue to bring that to fruition.
It definitely is, and that's honestly the biggest stumbling block that SEPTA's going to have.
But with the whole ridership thing, I mean, obviously the numbers could be a bit suspect. I mean, especially on the metro services, the Market Frankfurt, the Broad Street line, because I've been going around doing another video on trolleys, because Route 15 is coming back soon.
Yeah, I still remember when those first came out back in 2005.
Yeah.
It was delayed then too, so this is nothing new for that.
Yeah, that's actually one thing I wanted to ask about after this one, perhaps. But like I definitely. But when I was out there filming, I definitely saw a fair amount of fare evasion.
Mm-hmm.
Like pretty much every station I went to was like someone pulling the turnstile one direction and then slipping through.
And to some extent, it's almost the same way on the trains.
Yeah.
We have, the overworked staff that just don't care about their jobs, and they're not, or, in the situations you have a conductor by himself. Revenue is his last priority.
Right.
If you want 100% revenue, then you need to have someone in every car.
Exactly.
Or find better ways of fixing the keycard system.
But with the whole trying to drum up sort of more ridership in any sort of way we possibly can with regional rail, do you think that perhaps the fact that we're running 50-year-old equipment and could be a bit of a turnoff for the average rider, and do you think like maybe a new shiny trains could be like a wow factor that could bring them back?
I would say that definitely does have somewhat the wow effect with new equipment always getting people in, but the biggest thing that any agency has to deal with is the fact that we are so built up as a carb center.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of, again, like you were saying, a lot of agencies focus on the 95s.
Mm-hmm.
They aren't always willing to go out of their way to try and find out, where these people are going. How can we adjust services for that?
Yeah, exactly.
Because a lot of places are so behind with how they do things that there is no real attempt made to try to balance that.
Right.
Like, for SEPTA at least, they're somewhat willing to listen as long as there's money behind it.
Yeah, exactly.
Some of the services we run, especially on this line, are partially funded by the biggest centers that we have now, which is Penn Medicine, Drexel, and Jefferson.
Right. That's definitely a big draw for them.
The scheduling and headways are designed right around when they have shift changes.
Right. Exactly. And yeah, and catering to that definitely helps in the here and now. Sorry, but yeah, it's obviously there's the whole obviously that's the whole big thing though, is the car centric view of things. But thinking of like the prospective replacement for the fours, for you personally, what do you think that you would want to see as like features of them?
I definitely would like to see a return back to full cabs.
Yes.
A lot of people say that the fives are too claustrophobic because they have the corner cabs.
Yeah.
Actually, at one point there was one car that was retrofitted with a full cab.
Really?
But it was something that was determined to have cost too much money.
Of course.
Because the thing with the fives is, as an employee, you don't really have anywhere to hide.
Yeah, you have that. Like I know this is one other YouTuber I follow from Britain. He does reviews of like trains in England.
Mm-hmm.
But he always says of like trains that have the same configuration. He says the cabs suffer from postbox syndrome. Yeah, it's like sitting in a mailbox looking out to the flat.
Or phone booth syndrome.
Yeah, phone booth syndrome. That's another
what it is.
So like I'd imagine and I've seen like videos talking about the Silverliner IVs as well, is that like if you suffer from claustrophobia at all, you don't want to be assigned to drive a 5.
You definitely don't. But also just for the rest of the crew in general, I mean, with the 4s, you always have a vestibule to sneak away into.
Exactly. Yeah, you have a pretty wide amount of room to work with. Yeah. So, and that's definitely something that I've been considering as well. Is that, but yeah, the perceived benefit I've seen from having those kinds of cab configurations is that it's easy to walk from car to car, and like when you have multiple sets coupled together. Do you think that's like becoming less of a prevalent school of thought, perhaps, with those kinds of operations, or do you think that they'd still be useful?
In terms of what, not having full cabs?
Yeah, in terms of not having the full width cab.
Well, ultimately, whether or not you have a full width cab or not, it's going to be the same amount of doors you have to walk through.
True.
Because, when you have the fours opened up between cars, if you've ever noticed between two ends, you just have the bulkhead doors that fold over where the cab controls would be. And
Right.
then you just have the open walkway and then your inner parlor doors.
Yeah.
But the fives between cars is just parlor door to parlor door.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
it's the same amount of doors.
Yeah, though I'd imagine one thing with the crew issues is like you said, like there'd be like the engineer and like one, maybe two conductors. And if you were gonna have like the example I would have is like if you have the 3-car sets and like 3-car trains and you couple them together to make a 6-car set, you would have to station one conductor in each set at least.
Right. In a perfect world, you'd have your engineer conductor and then an assistant conductor at every set of traps.
Yeah.
In a perfect world with maximum efficiency with fours, that's what you would do.
Yeah.
The fives you have a little bit more leeway with because as long as you're able to walk back and forth, set all your traps because they're independent of the door controls. Everything is just push button up and close.
Exactly. So, yeah, that definitely would help the cause quite a bit. Yeah, and especially with newer equipment, that would definitely be work out and work a lot better. And
it's not even the fact of newer equipment; it's that as these technologies came about for that and these implementations, and New Jersey Transit has the feature on their bombers.
yeah, they do.
With full length doors and traps that you can just keep open and set open.
Right.
And only need one person to set all the doors for the entire train.
Yeah. So.
But it was something that was never retroactively done for the fours. If it could have been done.
And of course, we've talked a good bit about the about lessons from other operators from their equipment, like the M8s with Metro North, LIRR, New Jersey Transit. What do you think is the biggest lesson that could probably be taken from their experiences when looking for new equipment down the line for SEPTA?
I would say it's definitely a mentality of stop trying to do things on your own.
Yeah.
Because the biggest thing that SEPTA has faced is a lot of the contracts that they were sold, especially with the fives. No one else was buying anything at the time, really. But there was no options of really trying to piggyback on another order. If SEPTA had been, paying a little bit more attention the past couple of years, right when the MLBs came out, there were contract orders or contract options available. That's how Mark got their cars. There were options not taken. We could have had MLBs years ago.
Wow.
But because we don't need new equipment yet, we'll get it down the road. It's just missed opportunities like that.
Just eternally kicking the can.
Right. Just kicking it to next year or next decade or something like that.
Yeah.
And the M8s may not have been perfect, but starting with that as a base point and then adapting the design from there. Because even the Silverliner IVs, like if you ever noticed, despite the fact that they were made in 2010, they still feel dated somehow.
Yes.
Part of that goes back with the whole Bombardier lawsuit. But they more or less have a cousin car, which would be the MR90 up in Montreal that recently got replaced.
Oh yeah, those ones.
And it's somewhat based on that.
Wow.
Just again, originally being a Bombardier design.
Yeah, I honestly didn't know that. That's interesting. Yeah, and they did just recently replace those because the REM taking over. Yeah. Sad because I actually kind of I never ridden those before, but I did like the way they looked. And they looked pretty cool.
And that's why the fives look like they're from the 90s.
Yep. Yeah, I actually do know. I do know a certain RM Transit video that he actually put out recently where he's saying why do our new trains look so old? Well, Reese, I think I found your answer.
Well, they did change a few things about them, but if you were to put them side by side, you'd be like, oh, well, this is the same year here, and it's especially if you look at some of the early renders for the fives from 2004, 2005, it's even more identical to it.
Yeah, you basically took the old Bombardier design and you maybe slapped some SEPTA logos on them, maybe changed a little bit here and there, and
exactly.
Yeah, I'll put a picture up right here to show you what the original concept art looked like.
And the originals actually look better because they had that gray banding that they were supposed to put across the windows. But it's kind of there, but it's not nearly as dark as what the original design had for it.
Right. And that's really one. But really, the big thing really would be for pursuing new things is to, I guess you could say, wake up and smell the roses to what's going on in the industry right now, because especially since like a lot of operators seem to be on an equipment buying spree. They seem
Definitely. Well, a lot of things tend to come in waves.
Yeah.
You had, the 60s where initial state funding started coming in.
Yeah.
That's where, you got your 2s and 3s.
Yeah, that's
You had the 70s roll around, you just had people, the city, or the nationally funded Metroliner projects.
Yeah.
And then the 70s, you had, your Silverliner IVs, your Aero 2s, your Aero 3s, all at the same time.
Yep.
And then, 1980 came around, and then New York and Metro North and Long Island started going off with their orders.
Right.
Everything just kind of cycles around.
Yeah,
It's more so figuring out when that cycle is and trying to, what can we do or get out of this.
Yeah, exactly. And do you think that this may be a big broad question, this may be a big ask on that, but what do you think would encourage SEPTA to finally wake up and do actually smell the roses on that one, about actually wake up to realize that, hey, the Silverliner IVs are great, but their time may come soon. I think we really need to, you really need to wake up and realize that you have to move on this sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. I think ultimately it wouldn't even be from a numbers perspective. It would either be something catastrophic happening, or the FRA just saying no.
But I imagine, do you think that there's a worry about when the FRA may step in and actually say that you actively have to try and get new equipment? Do you think that's going to be more of a thing going forward, perhaps?
I haven't heard of anything specifically regarding it, but I know there have been murmurs of, this could be an issue at some point.
Yeah, and kind of a little, maybe sort of a personal thing that I'm sure, because you look at it, maybe not so much for me, but maybe for other people who may have been complaining about this being a thing, is that I don't think since the 2s or 3s that the equipment on SEPTA has had bathrooms. Do you think that would ever be a thing, or do you think that's something that staff may not want to deal with?
It's definitely something that the staff and SEPTA doesn't want to pay for, but there's also a state requirement that if you're over a certain length, that there has to be bathrooms involved. And none of SEPTA's lines meet that requirement.
Oh, really?
Whether that was by specific design or by chance, I think it may have been design.
Could have been.
But until the state or the feds see something else, it's never going to be a feature for SEPTA.
Gotcha. So, yeah, I guess you're still gonna have to do your business when you get to the station.
Just going to have to keep holding it, guys.
Keep holding it, fellas. And kind of a personal one to cap off, a personal one maybe to cap it off a little bit. There's going to be one more that I'll ask after this one, because this one's specific to the video, is that for you personally, what's your favorite SEPTA line to operate on?
I personally, and it was actually the first line I also qualified on with, territory and stuff like that, but it would be for the Norristown line.
Yeah.
It may have its caveats, with some of the clientele around Main Street, and I'm sure you've known that, but
yeah,
in terms of, just a nice line to work on and the scenery and everything, you got the river right there. Definitely Norristown.
Yeah, I like that run up there, especially around Mequon up to Conchie.
This time of year.
Yeah, I had to get footage out the window to actually, when I'm doing the video on Conjock, and I had to get footage out there because that was beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think I'd agree with you there. That's probably one of the best looking lines to run on.
Mm-hmm.
And personal thing for me is I've also been doing a video on the trolleys, especially since with Route 15. Do we have any idea of like when that might be ready?
I can only speculate on that, but because again, the city and the route people don't talk like that. So my connections are probably just as good as yours.
Yeah.
But considering, I just see it as somewhat of an impressive feat in its own right. The fact that they are rebuilding them.
Yeah.
Because they're doing all of that work in house, and I give massive amounts of credit to them.
Oh yeah, it's amazing. And I love that. I just love the fact that they've been keeping the old PCCs around. And I told my dad when that comes along, we're definitely taking him up there because I guarantee you he's ridden one of those. Yeah, because he's lived in the Philly area for all his life, and he's in his 70s. He's definitely had to have ridden a PCC at some point. It's safe to say with his testimony on the matter that the Silverliner IVs, while beloved particularly by SEPTA veterans, are presenting their own challenges for SEPTA operations, which are only set to increase in severity as their age persists. The current mentality of if it ain't broke, don't fix it is losing more of its luster with time, and it's worth considering what other options are out there going forward, even if SEPTA runs them up until they break or if the FRA puts their foot down and forces their hand. And it seems to me that SEPTA's higher-ups are at least partially seeing that importance. In early November 2023, right after my interview with Steve no less, SEPTA officially got the ball rolling, putting out an expression of interest, or EOI, for the Silverliner 6s, and laying out the specifications and performance characteristics that SEPTA wants for their new cars. Looking through what SEPTA wants manufacturers to consider, there are an interesting few tidbits that could shed insights into SEPTA's ideas for regional rail going forward. Firstly is the idea that SEPTA seems set on single-decker trains as opposed to the double-decker ideas we talked about in the interview and also being considered by enthusiasts, which, while it does limit capacity on trains in one regard, especially since it would be technically feasible to accomplish it, it does allow for the possibility of faster dwell times per car, especially if the system becomes more frequent and higher use in the future. Alongside the confirmation that they're set on single deckers, there is an interesting point that the cars could possibly not only be ordered as 2-car married pairs, but they are also open to the idea of 3-car and 4-car sets, along with open gangways between the cars. The idea of 4-car sets is an interesting one in particular, especially due to the fact that it makes a standard train set rather long, and doubled up, it would make a train far longer than the length of most platforms, even at newer rebuilt stations like Wawa, Conshohocken, and Primos, with only stations like Claymont which can accommodate 8-car trains being able to handle them. And that's saying nothing of the tiny stations on the network where you would need to be in a certain part of the train in order to get off there. The open gangways would help the cause along though. If you've ever ridden a SEPTA train and found that the car you're in is packed to the brim and wants to see if another car is available, that requires opening rather heavy doors to do so on both the 4s and the 5s. The open gangways are slowly being introduced on newer trains all around the country, from the R211 subway cars in New York City to the upcoming Amtrak Aero sets, which will appear on intercity operations in the US in the coming years. And the greater flexibility for the passenger they provide generally makes them popular whenever they are implemented. Also related to that point, one thing that SEPTA is weighing is whether to use conventional bogies or what are called Jacobs bogies for the wheel assemblies. For those unfamiliar, a conventional bogie would just hold up one end of the car, while Jacobs bogies would involve essentially one bogie sitting between 2 cars. Jacobs bogies are rather common on high-speed trains, most famously used on the TGV trains in France, with the main benefit being a notable weight reduction and simpler construction due to needing less wheels to carry the train, along with reduced squealing when going around sharp corners, which anyone going through the tight turn in the Center City Tunnel after Jefferson Station going towards Temple, or the tight turn going into 30th Street from Penn Medicine Station would greatly appreciate. But most of all though, Jacobs bogies present a noticeable improvement to safety at higher speeds, since the cars are very difficult to disconnect and allows the train to remain upright and in one piece. to the point that even a high-speed Eurostar train that derailed at 180 miles an hour in France in the year 2000 didn't roll over because of these bogies, and an incident that otherwise might have been very deadly only led to 14 minor injuries. Having said all that, regular bogies have better flexibility, since a car needing maintenance doesn't need an elaborate method to uncouple the connected cars. And while Jacob's bogies do tend to make trains lighter, more weight is distributed over less wheels, putting heavier axle load on the rails and possibly leading to more track wear and therefore higher track maintenance costs. This is a very interesting question for SEPTA to answer, and even if I personally expect SEPTA to pick traditional bogies due to ease of maintenance reasons, it's definitely good that they're weighing their options here. But by far the request that caught most enthusiasts and even conductor Steve off guard was the demand for the top speed of the cars to be reduced. For context, the Silverliner IVs have a service top speed of 95 miles per hour, while the 5s have a top speed of service of 100 miles per hour, even though there are only 3 places on the SEPTA system where that's even possible for them. They being on the Wilmington-Newark line throughout Delaware between Claymont, Wilmington, Churchman's Crossing, and Newark, the Paoli-Thorndale line between Malvern and Exton, and most notably, the Trenton line between Trenton and Levittown, though it was confirmed that the 5s were able to hit 115 miles per hour on a test run to Lancaster, Pennsylvania on the Keystone Corridor. However, in their EOI, SEPTA wanted the top speed of the cars to be 80 miles per hour. Now, you may ask what the deal is here and why a lot of people are surprised by this. Sure, there are sections of track where SEPTA trains can reach those higher speeds, but they're not the majority of the network, not by a long shot. On most routes, the top speed is usually between 60 and 80 in any case. But on the 3 aforementioned sections of track on the Trenton, Wilmington, Newark, and Paoli-Thorndale lines, especially the latter 2 since the fast parts I'm referring to here are not quadruple tracked so that Amtrak services can easily work around them, which is definitely necessary on those lines, a top speed of 80 could lead not only to slightly slower schedules, but also bottlenecking of Amtrak services if they're not careful, especially so on the double-track section of the Wilmington-Newark line between Claymont and Wilmington. Now, a valid argument can be made that in the long run, this can lead to better reliability, and if the acceleration of the cars is an improvement over the current stock, then they can have schedules that are just as fast, if not faster in most cases, which is 100% fair, since better acceleration does mean faster trip times. However, as the Northeast Corridor and its surrounding rail lines aim to become even busier than they are now in the coming years from both SEPTA services and Amtrak services, this could turn into a small but crucial detail in future operations that can lead to problems. And this is all alongside a concern that conductor Steve brought up, that if the top speed of the car is lowered, it can actually put more strain on the motors and can therefore create reliability problems if the top speed is capped at 80, and therefore the cars are forced to run at their higher design speeds for far longer periods of time than the 4 or 5s do now, potentially counteracting any perceived reliability benefits that the lower top speed would bring. I will note though that there is an interesting theory as to why this top speed is being considered, which I must stress is just a theory, and that is to allow for lower energy consumption and therefore lower energy cost, particularly on the former Pennsy lines where SEPTA trains run on electricity supplied by Amtrak, even on the lines that SEPTA owns, like the Media Wawa and Chestnut Hill West lines, as opposed to the former Reading side of the network where SEPTA owns and maintains their own electrical systems. So in a lot of ways, SEPTA is aiming for something similar, but obviously something more modern at the same time. And it is very interesting to see the other ideas that they're considering to bring their future rolling stock into the 21st century. However, as I was pondering what we could see, it struck me that there is a type of train that could serve as a good rough example of what we might see going forward. And better yet, it was only a day trip away from me. So, to see what could be for Philadelphia, let's get up and close and personal with this train, shall we? Welcome to New York City, the Big Apple itself. The city that never sleeps, the greatest city in the world, my source being the people that live there, who for some reason support the Giants and the Jets, so yeah, questionable. Though I will say, it is probably the closest that North America has to a city that runs more on its rails than it does on its asphalt. However, leading into and out of the city are plenty of rail lines too, besides the subway, with New Jersey Transit carrying passengers from northern and central Jersey into the city from the south and west, and the Long Island Railroad carrying passengers across from the east. But of course, there is even more to the north of the city, and that's the domain of New York City's third commuter rail operator, the fittingly named Metro North Railroad. Established in 1983, the exact same year that SEPTA took over commuter operations in Philly, since both SEPTA and Metro North took over operations from Conrail at the same time, Metro North operates services radiating out of the legendary and beautiful Grand Central Terminal on 45th Street in Manhattan, with services going north to Poughkeepsie and Wassaic and northeast to New Haven, Connecticut, with branches on that line going to New Canaan, Danbury, and Waterbury. And it's on that last cluster of services, the fittingly named New Haven line, where we find a possible example of what SEPTA might be running in the future, one of the most modern electric trains on the continent, known simply as the M8. Built by Kawasaki and delivered to Metro North beginning in 2011, albeit after 2 years of delays, the M8 proved pretty quickly to be the perfect replacement for the aging equipment that held sway on the New Haven line, including the 1970s vintage M2s, the 1980s M4s, and the 1990s M6s, with 471 cars in use as of today. The main benefits they presented was a quick change between power modes, as the New Haven line starts its journey out of Grand Central running on DC third rail electric power before changing to AC overhead catenary at Pelham. Whereas previous models of cars on these services were only able to make the switch between third rail and catenary while stationary, the M8s can do so on the fly. And when it happened on my experience on an out and back journey between Grand Central and Stamford, Connecticut this December, I didn't even realize it happened. That's how seamless it was. Naturally, this little bit would not be a benefit for SEPTA because their lines all use overhead catenary, the correct form of electrification, but that's not the only improvement the M8s bring. The interior of the cars are much roomier than the previous ones, and from my analysis, they're a lot more comfortable and inviting than most SEPTA equipment, with the seats being one of my favorites that I've ridden on a commuter train so far, blowing the current 4 seats out of the water. In fact, I think the only one that might be better than these as far as commuter trains go would be the seats on SEPTA's bomber trains, they being the push-pull sets that they run in express services in rush hours. The M8s have very wide doors to allow for large numbers of passengers to board or disembark in a faster time frame and do so a lot more comfortably. And they have a fair amount of space for bicycles, which is a good response to the last mile transportation question after you get off. Plus, unlike every SEPTA train since the Silverliner IVs, the M8s have bathrooms, which for the much longer journeys that Metro North services and their passengers tend to take at over an hour long in a lot of cases, is definitely needed. It's not spectacular, but it's a very good feature. Quality of life, that's all I'm saying. Access between the two cars in the set is also an easy affair, as while they don't have fully open gangways between cars, the doors between them are open with a large button, the same way they are on Amtrak cars, making it much easier for the user overall than having to swing open a heavy steel door. Also, there are plug sockets on every row of seats. Why SEPTA trains don't have these at all is beyond me, and they'd be a nice feature and very useful for a lot of riders, as was the case when I rode on them to keep my phone at a decent charge for filming. If I had a bit of a gripe with them in some way, it may be their passenger information displays, using only small LED displays rather than the full-on screens like the Silverliner IVs. I do like how clear the automated announcements are though, so that's a redeeming quality there.
This station is Silverliner 125th Street. As you leave the train, please watch the gap between the train and the platform. This is the train to New Haven. The next station is Greenwich.
As for the cars themselves, the M8s were originally ordered solely as 2-car married pair sets, but after their introduction and with increasing ridership on their services, Metro North needed to expand capacity. And to do that, the Connecticut Department of Transportation, on Metro North's behalf, ordered unpowered center coaches to stick in the middle of the married pairs to create 3-car sets to expand capacity. Given that SEPTA is considering 3 and 4-car sets for the next-gen cars, this is an interesting tidbit to consider too, though ideally the third car should have powered axles as well. And finally, an important factor for the Cruise is the use of full-width cabs, which compared to the claustrophobic mailbox of a cab that the Silverliner IVs have would be a massive improvement from a crew comfort standpoint. All told, while the M8s may not look like a truly radical departure from what SEPTA currently has at first glance, there is no doubt that they're a marked improvement in a lot of facets. And a car like the M8 would be a major improvement over the 4s while providing a measure of consistency, as they're powered by the same Mitsubishi electric traction motors that the Silverliner IVs use. And while they're rated for a top speed of 100 miles an hour, they only run at SEPTA's target speed of 80 miles an hour in revenue service, though that's largely for infrastructure reasons. And this is to say nothing of the proven safety record of these cars as well, demonstrated during the car's performance in saving lives and preventing serious injuries in the Fairfield derailment and collision on May 17, 2013. In this incident, a northbound train of M8 cars headed towards New Haven derailed due to a broken joint bar holding 2 pieces of track together. Coming to a rest in the path of the southbound tracks, a southbound train, also made up of M8s, heading towards New York, attempted to slow down, quickly decelerating from 70 miles per hour to just over 20 before it hit the derailed train. However, due to the quick braking of the southbound train and the M8's sturdy construction, the 2 trains remained mostly intact after impact. As a result, while 65 people of the around 500 on board the 2 trains were injured in the accident, not a single person was killed in a wreck that with older equipment could have proven to be fatal. All of these are very good feathers in the M8's cap, and if discussions I've had with a certain transit and urbanist YouTuber from around Philly were to be believed, SEPTA is looking at the M8 as at least a viable option for the next generation of Silverliner cars. And having sampled them for myself, I can safely say the M8s get my endorsement for being a good option that ticks all the boxes that SEPTA is looking for, while being a market improvement for riders. Naturally, there will need to be changes made to the prospective future SEPTA cars. Most notably, there will need to be doors with steps to access low-level platforms, and SEPTA's cars will most likely not have bathrooms, as I discussed with Conductor Steve. However, rolling stock manufacturers are very much used to making exceptions for certain operators, so I can certainly imagine the general underpinnings and design of the M8 with SEPTA-specific features. And I'm certainly not discounting that other builders like Stadler, Siemens, even Alstom could bring interesting ideas to the table. The process has only just started, and the picture will only become more clear as time goes on. All told, I say, watch this space. There is no doubt that the Silverliner IV is a Philly transport icon, mostly for its longevity, reliability, and the fact that it is indeed the symbol of SEPTA's regional rail operations. Crews, riders, and maintenance staff alike have all been accustomed to them, and for the older members of staff, it will be sad to see them go when their time comes. I have no doubt that a few of them will be preserved and put on display somewhere, so that we all may reminisce about them. But as much as we will be sad to see them go, it is important that these cars be replaced with a worthy successor. While I have sampled one, there are definitely cases for other trains to be worthy of the mantle of the next symbol of regional rail operations for the city of brotherly love. However, while it's safe to say that while the routes that regional rail runs on haven't changed much, at least since the 1980s, the passenger needs certainly have. And having trains that present all of the features and creature comforts that passengers have come to expect, while providing ease of use for their crews and providing performance that can match or even better what we had before, will be absolutely vital in the quest to improve regional rail services and bring them anywhere close to what they can be. While SEPTA has a reputation for having great ideas but not a true overarching plan and drive to accomplish them, they are going to need to have that to replace the Silverliner IVs, since any short-sighted decisions would be sure to bite them down the line, and the last thing the agency needs is a black eye in their attempt to replace their old equipment. Now, one may say that SEPTA's new train should be a massive quantum leap in terms of performance and especially appearance, and in particular, a more streamlined and stylish appearance compared to the boxy designs we've seen lately, including with the M8s. I don't disagree with this notion in principle, and I would love for SEPTA's future trains to look like something out of a 1990s vision for the future, or maybe more like trains in Europe, frankly. However, this does lead to a practical consideration that completely negates the positive effect of a more streamlined look. The biggest ones being getting between the sets of cars. The streamlined look makes it impossible to add a door between each of the sets, making travel between sets physically impossible unless you're stopped at a station. And if a door is added between the sets, well, there goes your streamlined and stylish look right there. Case in point, allow me to introduce you the Bombardier Alstom Aventra series of commuter trains in the UK. Here's one with a streamlined front that you can't travel between. And here's one with a door. Bruh. And this is to say nothing of the fact that this version is forced to have a claustrophobic cab as a result, and I thought we wanted to get rid of those. And plus, I think the M8s look generally pretty good in any case, even with their boxy appearance. They still look up to date. You can make it work, just don't expect the train to be pointy on the end. To be honest though, it's not really needed. Regardless of all that, a platform that has seen success elsewhere, from the tried and true Kawasaki M8 to the unique Stadler Flirt, yes, that is its actual name, to the Siemens Desiro, to even the Alstom Extrapolis, could bring in interesting quirks to the table that SEPTA can take an interest in too. All told though, Kawasaki could have a strong foot in the door model if they want to present a contender, and it's possible, talking to conductor Steve, that Stadler could present their interest as well. All things considered, we simply don't know much at this juncture of who is interested and what they'll present to SEPTA. All we can do is wait and see and speculate what the future rolling stock may have in store. It is said that 3 key things are needed to get people to consider public transportation: frequency of service, reliability of service, and good old-fashioned speed. All 3 aspects can be very much improved upon with new equipment, though frequency in SEPTA's case is more predicated on a lack of crews to run the system to its full potential rather than an equipment shortage. Reliability can certainly be gained with new equipment, if the current equipment age playing havoc on the mechanics of the 4s are anything to go on, and speed can be gained not only through faster dwell times at stations and better accessibility, a topic I have a video on, hint hint, but also through faster trains, particularly in the realm of acceleration and braking in the case of trains that are built for serving every wayside station it passes, rather than going fast for long sections of track like an intercity train would. The Silverliner 6 has a lot riding on it, even though we don't know what it'll even look like or who will build it. But this next generation of train will be absolutely critical in being the next step in SEPTA's story to shape its regional rail network into something it can take great pride in. While we do have an example that we can take from just up north as to what it could be and what it possibly should be in many ways, it will indeed be a journey to see what we will get in the coming years. And in the meantime, I'll savor the Silverliner IVs as much as I can when I ride them. They may be a blast from the past both for good and for ill, but they serve not only as a window to the past, but also as a true standard bearer for what a regional train is for the people of the Philly area. We can only hope that such a standard bearer can pass that standard along to a worthy carrier of the torch, one which can, like the Silverliner IVs before them, serve as a visible and reliable symbol, marking the beginning of the future for how we get around Philly.